They told me not to do it.
Under no circumstances should you ever remove the screws that hold this thing together.
They told me it would be a nightmare. They told me it would spawn the apocalypse. But I had no choice. I had no choice.
So you're thinking that you might just want to rebuild that old Bosch CIS fuel distributor? Cool. But I have some information that might just make you think twice. Stay tuned. Hey YouTube, welcome back to the channel. So I am back for another restoration video of this 1985 Mark II Scirocco. If you've been following my progress, I've been restoring this 1985 Scirocco. I'm the only owner, drove this car off the lot brand new in 1986. A little bit over 100,000 miles on the odometer, and it sat for 15 years, after which I decided, hey, I want to bring her back to life. So if you've been following my progress, in the last episode I was able to dig into the Bosch K-Jetronic CIS fuel injection system, which was basically frozen rock solid due to gas that had been sitting in that system for 15, 16 years. Gas that turned to varnish, turned rock hard. Was able to get the airflow sensor cleaned up and seems to be working just fine. Really happy with that. In this episode, what I want to do is dig into the actual Bosch fuel distributor, or the metering head, and see if I can get the control plunger loose, see if there's anything wrong in the inside, get her back together, and that's one of the last things I need to do, I hope, before I can start reattaching fuel injection lines, get the head back on, and get this thing running. So as always, I really appreciate everybody that stops by and takes a look. And remember, I'm just a guy with a garage and some tools trying to bring a car back to life. And without further ado, let's get into this one.
So, before I do anything radical like take the distributor apart, I thought a little carb cleaner was appropriate. Nope.
Under no circumstances. No circumstances.
Locked in place, not moving at all. Nope. Alright, so I don't know if this is going to make any difference or not, but I think what I want to do is make sure that I put each of these screws or bolts back in the place that they came out of. So to do that, I'm just going to take a piece of cardboard. I don't know if I really need to do this, but I'm a little scared about this whole rebuild. Okay, and then I'll just push them through in each one of these positions so that I know where they came from. Alright, let's do this. Like I said, these were not held, or not tight at all. At least it didn't take very much force to break these loose. right.
Nope.
Definitely loose. Plunger is not loose.
Nope.
Feels like something is holding it in place though. Is it this? Can't be this. Oh.
Under no circumstances.
What have you done?
So this thing needs to come out, and it looks like it is in there solid. So I want to make sure I have got this indexed right, and you can see there's a flat here and a notch, and that notch is perpendicular to this flat. So I think this should pull out, but we'll see. At any rate, I'm like past the point of no return. So both exciting and terrifying. Wow.
Nope.
Well, I'm thinking this is gonna go to ultrasonic for a little bit. Can't believe there's anything in here that I could hurt. And maybe this will come out. I'm holding off taking this diaphragm off here because underneath I believe there's a bunch of springs and caps that I just want to make sure that I maintain the right ones for each port.
A few moments later.
Nope.
yeah, baby!
Hallelujah. Yes! There it is.
Hell yeah!
Yes. Woo. Yeah, baby. Woo! All right. I'll throw this back in. There's a fuel filter here, which looks pretty fragile. Otherwise, I don't think it looks in too bad a shape, to tell you the truth.
Pretty good.
Sure was stuck in there pretty good.
That's what she said.
All right, so let's talk about fuel distributor assembly.
What?
Now, I have spent a lot of time researching and thinking about putting this fuel distributor back together and putting it back together in such a way that it doesn't leak.
Leaks won't hold me back.
There are rebuild kits available for these Bosch fuel distributors. I did buy a fuel distributor repair kit. This is from Precision Machinery, and it basically has all of the O-rings that you're going to need, as well as a replacement diaphragm. So all that's available. There's two primary sources that I've seen online. One is the Precision Machinery, and the other one is from a company called Salvox. And both of these are readily available on eBay as long as you put in the Bosch number of which distributor you have. You're able to get these things. I think this was on the order of $90 for this rebuild kit. Okay, so getting the rebuild kit isn't my major concern. My major concern is getting these two pieces put back together along with all of the springs and rebuilding the column in the middle, putting this back together and making sure that it doesn't leak. And that's kind of where the rub comes in. There are a ton of, well, there are a lot of videos that you can find online. There's a lot of information you can find on the VW forums, the Mercedes forums, the Porsche forums, the Audi forums on how to rebuild these cast iron fuel distributors. And for the most part, they're pretty informative, I have to say. The thing that they don't talk about most of the time is whether the thing leaks or not. The only person that I saw that was honest about this whole thing kind of showed how he put the distributor back together. This was for a BMW, and then got it back on the car, and as the car was running, he basically said, oh, yep, it's leaking, got to take care of that.
I gotta fix that leak ASAP.
Took it back off, put some more stuff on, and then went about his business. So that's the only one that I basically saw that was honest about the fuel leakage. Okay, so here's where things get complicated and get complicated real fast. So as the old saying goes, assembly is the reverse of disassembly. Well, not so fast. When it comes to reassembly of these distributors, whether you've got an aluminum one or in this case a cast iron one, it's all about sealing it up so it doesn't leak. Now, from what my research has shown, and again, I'm just a guy with a garage and some tools, and in this case with a good internet connection, what my probing around and research has shown is that there's essentially two camps to this problem. One camp says, no way, you don't need any sealant. You put the two things back together and everything's highly machined, and when you torque it down, it's all good. No sealant needed. You can definitely find a lot of folks in that camp. Now, while that's certainly a minimalist approach, I personally am not going to go down that path. I've been taking everything in this restoration painfully slow, painstakingly researched. I probably made a lot of mistakes along the way, but this is one thing where I don't want to get it wrong, and I don't want to keep going in and messing with it. So while there certainly are the folks I want to acknowledge that are on the you don't have to use any sealant camp, I'm not going down that road. Now, there's a second road, and the second camp of folks say, yep, you got to use a sealant. You got to use a sealant between the cast iron pieces and this very thin metal diaphragm. Now, what type of sealant, how it's applied, where it's applied is another complete can of worms, bowl of spaghetti, whatever you want to call it, and that's where I've spent a lot of time over the last few months actually trying to research what I want to do. So for the folks that have posted content using sealants, there appears to be three-ish types of approaches, and again, this is just what I've found. I'm sure I'm missing some, so bear with me. So there are plenty of folks on the Volkswagen Vortex forum, for example, that are saying, you know, you shouldn't have taken this thing apart to begin with. You're never going to get it sealed right. It's always going to leak. And the reason it's always going to leak is because when Bosch put this thing together and had this diaphragm, there are a few folks that claim to know, master technicians who have taken Bosch classes, that said that this piece had some sort of, I think I've seen it referred to as a waxy substance, very thin coating of some sort of material that was meant to act as a sealant, so when you put everything back together, it's leak-free. Now, I don't have enough knowledge to agree or disagree, but what I can do is do some observations, and I have to say
that when I peeled this thing apart, the way it came apart indicated to me that maybe there was some sort of really thin material on here that came from the factory as a sealant. It makes sense to me if I look at, in fact, the top surface of the distributor, and if I get it in the light just right, it appears that there is the residue of some sort of material that was very thin, very uniform, and actually on the bottom as well. So I don't necessarily discount the fact that this thing especially had some sort of special wax or special sealant directly from the factory to aid in keeping it leak tight. Now, with that said, there's a couple camps, 3 basic camps of what to use going forward using one of these rebuild kits. Number 1, I've seen both on video and I've seen in sort of some documentation that I downloaded and printed that some people use Loctite 515 or Loctite 518. Another group of folks, in fact, reaching out to the precision manufacturing or precision machinery folks and me asking them what sealant to use, they responded back to me and said they recommend Permatex gasket dressing and sealant, and that's 85-420. Okay. Other folks that I've found say use Permatex anaerobic flange sealant 51-531. Don't know.
Fuck if I know.
And then there's like a third group of people that say, no, you got to use Permatex Indian head shellac. And I'll get to that in a minute. So, one of the issues that I see with using either the Loctite or the Permatex gasket sealants is, number 1, they tend to come in these big tubes, right? This is the gasket dressing and sealant, the 85-420. And it's got a fairly large mouth, right? This is at least a 1/4 inch, a 1/4 inch on the top of that tube. So laying down a thin line is not going to be very easy. Which leads me to sort of the next point, is that if you look at either one of these sides, and most of the instructions that I've seen say, don't attempt to put sealant on the diaphragm.
Oh shit, Sherlock!
Put sealant on the top and the bottom surfaces of the distributor itself. Well, the problem with that is that there's fuel and there's little filters which I haven't taken out, and there's ports and all sorts of things where you don't want gasket sealant or particulate to break off of and go into, especially the fuel filters, which you could definitely clog one of those small basket filters, and then you've got absolutely no flow to one of your cylinders or one of your injectors. So laying down a very accurate line, a very thin line of sealant is going to be a challenge, especially when you're talking about tubes like this. So the one way I thought I would get away from the large mouth outlet of this big tube was to utilize a plastic syringe, and there's a ton of different syringes you can find on Amazon, for example. This one has got a pretty nice curved spout into a very thin output, so that it should help if I go this route to lay down a thin line of the Permatex around both the top and bottom. So then the next thing, once you determine what sort of sealant you're going to use, is how are you going to apply that sealant onto the top and bottom layers of the metering head. Some folks, again, have put sealant or have instructions to put sealant only around the perimeter of both the top and the bottom. Other folks have shown and gone into complex detail of going around every single orifice and every single bolt hole. And then Other folks, which appear to be much more on the professional side, basically have instructions. In fact, this is from K-Jet Specialist, which I believe is in Australia. And they do have pretty nice instructions rebuilding a cast iron K-Jet fuel distributor, which you can Google and pull down and read for yourself. Great illustrations, great pictures on how to do that. But when it comes to the sealing, and because this is a professional garage or a professional outfit versus a home mechanic like myself, their words say, the next stage is a bit more tricky for you. I have a machine which places Loctite 515 on the surfaces of the fuel distributor and shim perfectly evenly. So here's probably someone that's been trained in it or has years or decades worth of experience on how to do a seal. They do recommend Loctite 515, but then they've got a special machine, which again is probably going to go in and put down a very controlled, very thin layer, which someone at home using a syringe or maybe even a paintbrush is not going to be able to do. Other instructions, this happens to be from CISJetronic.com support. Their instructions say use some liquid gasket seal, and then in parentheses a very thin layer to seal the upper half. So what is that liquid gasket seal, and what does it mean to put a very thin layer?
Fuck if I know.
So as I moved forward initially with the gasket dressing and seal, I wanted to see, how viscous is this stuff? How long does it take to dry? The instructions on here basically say let it dry for a little bit and then put the things together. Well, even with a small diameter outlet syringe like this, I wanted to see how small of a line, how thin of a line I could lay down, how long it would take to quote-unquote dry before it was time to assemble the halves. And as I reached out to, this time, technical folks at Permatex, asking them about the directions, they said, well, so you're supposed to let it dry until you can't smell the solvent anymore. So what does that mean?
Fuck if I know.
I mean, I was looking for a time associated with that, but I guess that depends on how thick of a bead you put down, how thin of a bead you put down. So I did a couple really rudimentary experiments where I took some aluminum foil, I put some Permatex into this small syringe, and then I went down and laid down a couple lines, real thin lines. Again, thin lines that would be about the size of the lines that you would want to put in between these orifices. And I did some circles, just some simple geometric shapes. And then I waited for, I think in this case, 20 minutes, and another one experiment I waited 45 minutes to see how the effect of drying would be for this gasket material. Put another piece of aluminum foil on top, and then took a book, or in this case a heavy book, and put it on top to sort of simulate the two halves of the fuel metering head coming together and torquing down. So why did I do that? Well, yeah, it's not a very controlled experiment, but it does give me some qualitative data as to the effect of letting a certain line thickness dry. And when I put those two together and smash it, I wanted to see how much that line that I put down is going to spread out. Because that's my main concern, is that I put too thick of a line of sealant on here, and then it didn't dry long enough, and it's still very viscous. And when I put these two pieces back together, I'm going to squish it into these places where I don't want it to be.
So while this wasn't Nobel Prize level work, it did sort of confirm my suspicions that at 20 minutes of sitting and even at 45 minutes of sitting, the Permatex did seem to squish out quite a lot. And given the tight tolerances between all of the cavities on both the top and bottom sides of the distributor, head, I'm not sure I want to use that product. Beyond sort of the Loctites and the Permatexes, a number of folks have said use Permatex Indian Head Shellac. Now, Indian Head Shellac comes in a small little tube or a small little bottle. You can still find it. I found it at my auto parts store. You can find it online. Amazon has it. All the auto parts places have it. And the advantage it looks like for that is that it's more of a liquid. You can take a small paintbrush and actually brush on that shellac all around the surfaces, both top and bottom. And the directions basically say to let it dry for an hour or two and then do the assembly. Sounded like a great idea. I actually did reach out to the repair kit people once again with an email and said, hey, what about that? And they said, nope, we don't recommend it because number one, it's a it is good for fuel resistance. It does provide a really good seal, but they don't recommend it because if something goes wrong, getting those two pieces back apart again, it dries really hard.
That's what she said.
Okay, so that's the one thing that they said they don't recommend. So if you messed up something's not working and one of the injectors isn't getting the right flow and you need to take it apart, they said getting it apart without actually doing damage to either the top or the bottom parts of the metering head it's going to be a nightmare. Okay, I was kind of leaning towards doing that, and then after hearing that, I'm not. But you guys take it for what you want to do. You can go online and find lots and lots of different people who use this, have shown how to put it on, have put it together, and then again, I never really can see or hear back whether it was successful or not. I guess it was at this point that I'm thinking, what am I going to do? I certainly am not sure whether I can lay down this Permatex, which was recommended by Precision Machinery rebuild kit folks, and not have the line or the bead that I put down smash out and get into any number of places that I don't want it to be. I don't want to use the Indian Head Shellac and not be able to get the part back again, get it broken off if I need to. So I decided, well, there's got to be some people out there in the world that rebuild these things for a living. And doing a quick search, there's 3 or 4, maybe 5 companies that come up readily on a Google search. Some are not in the United States. There's one in Australia. I think there's a few in the UK or in Europe. And then I did find one place in, I believe it was Alabama. Right, so the company is CIS Flowtech, and they're located in Fairhope, Alabama. I reached out to those folks and told them that I'm doing this restoration on the car. They responded really quickly and said they would be more than happy to help out. They said their pricing is dependent on the Bosch number of the fuel distributor, and based on the number that I sent them, they're quoting a rebuild cost of $640 plus somewhere in the range of $25 to $50 for shipping and handling within the continental US. So the message also said that the current turnaround time to do a rebuild is on the order of 2 to 5 weeks. So I was wondering exactly what a rebuild consists of. They said that the rebuild consists of a cleaning, replacement of all the O-rings and diaphragms, and then something that I definitely am not prepared to do, they do bench testing and calibration. So I think that's really kind of a neat thing, and clearly I can't do that here. They also provide a 1-year limited warranty on all of the rebuild services, with the proviso that any usage of fuel with ethanol in it and failure to properly clean out a fuel system prior to reinstallation does void their warranty. So to me, at the current moment, I could definitely
pick one of these sealant options. I could move forward, but I'm feeling that there's 100 different ways for me to screw this up. I've only got one of these. This is the only one that this car came with. I don't want to mess it up at this point, and what I'm going to do is put it back together. I've got all the parts laid out in front of me. I'm going to spend half an hour and get everything back in place where it belongs. Close it up, not very tightly, but get it closed up with all the original parts and send it on out to CIS Flowtech. I chose them not only because they responded quickly, but they seem to have some sort of a legacy within the VW community, at least in the US. I found their name all over the VW Vortex forums when I was searching through there, so I'm hoping that they know what they're doing. I did let them know that I was going to mention their name and their services in the video. So if this works out, you'll know when I know to see if it's leaking or if it's not. We'll get this thing back on the car, and then maybe it'll be an option if you've run into fuel distributor problems yourself. So with that said, that's the end of this video. It's been a long one. Kudos to you if you've actually made it through the last 30 plus minutes. I appreciate it as always. If you like this content or you think that it's got something useful for you, I'd really appreciate a thumbs up. Anytime you leave a comment, I always try to take a look at all those as well. So I will go ahead and get this thing packaged up and out to CIS Flowtech, and hopefully within a month or so I'll have a brand new distributor back. And the next thing will be to get all of the CIS put together, get my good looking steel braided fuel lines on, and it's kind of really the last thing that I wanted to do before getting this car put back together. So I appreciate it, and we'll see you on the next video.
You can take it apart, and you can put it back together, but you will never get it to not leak. I promise you.